Alister Jack was wrong to delete his WhatsApp messages. He has apologised and he regrets it. Humza Yousaf can't step out of the shadow of his disgraced predecessor and say the same. And of course, Nicola Sturgeon has not apologised. She has not apologised for doing it. She has said she was right because she was following government policy. That's a massive difference, First Minister. But I can't let the First Minister's confusion over this travel ban with Spain pass. He's just saying that they kept in place the restrictions with Spain. On the 20th of July, the day after that email was sent, Humza Yousaf said, and I quote, "We are able to lift the requirement for those travelling from Spain." 5 days later, he says the decision to exempt Spain earlier this week was taken when the data showed there was an improvement. The latest data has given us cause for concern to overturn that decision. So he definitely made a decision on the back of that email.
Mr Ross, can I just ask the front bench to please resist any temptation to contribute? Mr Ross.
Well, I think they're trying to come up with a story here because what the First Minister has said so far does not match what he did in practice in 2020. But we know that the deleted WhatsApp messages were covering up major decisions from this SNP government. We know that because of the messages we have been able to see. Humza Yousaf, when he was then Health Secretary in charge of the NHS, joked with the National Clinical Director, Jason Leach. They laughed about false claims that children were hospitalised because of COVID. And in one revealing exchange, Humza Yousaf said this: "I'm winging it and will get found out sooner or later." First Minister, at what point do you think you were finally found out?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let's again look at the facts. Where Douglas Ross is right, of course, there was Spain initially not exempt from a travel corridor and then put on a travel corridor. Why were they? Because we have the data that the UK government presented by the London School of Hygiene.
First Minister, do you know we have so many members who want to put questions to the First Minister? That would be more likely if we could get on with our session and if I don't have to keep asking front benches to resist the temptation to contribute when they shouldn't be. First Minister.
Well, they don't want to listen to the facts, and the facts are this. That Douglas Ross, of course, said in his own response that the situation improved in Spain, and that is correct. The London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine showed a marked improvement in the position in Spain, with point prevalence going down to 0.015%. And that is the reason, of course, why they were then put on the exempt list. When the situation worsened, just a matter of days later actually, worsened considerably, all of the UK nations decided to take them off that exempt list. So again, we made the decisions for purely epidemiological reasons. And when it comes to the UK government and the messages that we have seen, can I remind Douglas Ross of what we've seen from the UK government and the messages that have been revealed? He had a Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, that Douglas Ross not only backed to the very end, invited to his party conference. Boris Johnson, who allegedly, according to the evidence we've heard, said, "Let the bodies pile up high." When discussing long COVID, he called it, and forgive me, Presiding Officer, for the language, bollocks. We had a Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who partied in number 10 while loved ones missed the funerals of their relatives. So yes, we could have done better when it came to the retention of informal messages. But when it comes to steering this country through some of its darkest days, I'm very pleased we had Nicola Sturgeon in charge here in the Scottish Government, as opposed to Boris Johnson.
I would remind all members of the need for courtesy, and members, I would be grateful if you could desist for a moment. Just let's remind one another of the need for courtesy and respect in this chamber, and that applies to using quotations, to use words that might otherwise be regarded as unparliamentary. I'm also very conscious, as I've said, of the numbers who wish to put questions today, and I would be grateful for more concise questions and responses. And I call Douglas Ross.
Even after yesterday's evidence from the former First Minister, the words we've heard from the COVID-bereaved Humza Yousaf still backs her to the hilt. And that tells you everything you need to know about this First Minister, who is simply the continuity candidate for Team Sturgeon. But as Health Secretary during the pandemic, he joked about not knowing what he was doing. When he sent that message, by that stage, 10,000 people in Scotland had already lost their lives from COVID. But he wasn't the only one that's been found out. Nicola Sturgeon destroyed evidence on an industrial scale. The SNP government considered independence for key decisions. They did things for purely political reasons. They broke promises to grieving families and the public who sacrificed so much. Humza Yousaf was winging it, but hasn't the whole SNP government been found out?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I go back to the point that I've made several times in these exchanges over the weeks, that I absolutely accept wholeheartedly that a retention policy on informal communications clearly could have and should have been better. That's why, of course, I've commissioned that externally led review. But on the big calls, many of the decisions that we made helped to save lives. If we look at some of the evidence that's been presented to the COVID inquiry, if you look at the evidence from Professor Sir Ian Diamond, and Jackie Bailey shouting she may want to listen actually to the evidence by Professor Sir Ian Diamond. He's the Chief Executive of the UK Stats Authority and UK National Statistician. He gave details of age standardised mortality rates per 100,000 right across the 4 nations. This is his data, not my data. And that analysis shows that in Scotland, of course, we had the lowest level of deaths per 100,000, according to the ASMR data. Now, every single one of those lives lost is undoubtedly a tragedy. In fact, many of my colleagues on these benches lost a loved one to COVID. But on those calls, the decisions we made have helped to save lives. Let's look at what the World Health Organization said, and again, not my data, the World Health Organization's data. They estimated that 22,138,000 lives in Scotland were saved as a direct result of the COVID-19 vaccination programme. So I accept fully that when it comes to informal communications, we could have and should have done better. There are also other decisions which, of course, we look at and we think we could have perhaps moved quicker or moved earlier or done things differently. So while political opponents may well try to rewrite history and engage in, frankly, smears, insults
briefly, please, First
towards
Minister.
Government ministers and civil servants, I can stand up here and say that I know that every single day of that pandemic, Nicola Sturgeon, the rest of us in the Scottish Government, civil servants included, worked for one reason and one reason only: to protect the people of Scotland from the harms of COVID.